Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be the third and final video in this short 3-video series about the upcoming Battlegrounds victory track meta for Season 4. And so far we have gone over the basic strategies offensively and defensively, basic things basically to look out for. And then obviously we did highlight some of the potential MVPs. There were a couple of champions missed out, obviously, like Cal, CGR and Null. I know that comments how immediately reminded me of that, but yes, like CGR was so obvious that it just didn't quite occur to me to put it on that list. But either way, Cal Obsidian, Cal Obsidian, Null and CGR are all likely going to be quite potent attackers as well. But we need to talk about defense here, and the first thing obviously is the biggest category, but also the category that I think is going to be the easiest to counter, because the champions that just start with armor ups, as long as you have a proficient way of dealing with them, either via nullify or you have a falcon or stuff like that, it is not going to be as troublesome. They will be more potent on defense as they normally would be, but these are not necessarily going to be the champions that you need to put some heavy focus on. And that being said, we have champions like Captain America Sam Wilson, which can be sneakily good defender as is, and obviously demanding that power burn immunity could be quite detrimental, especially, because the rest of his abilities still need to be taken care of. We have Infamous Iron Man, and then we are dipping into more interesting territories where I'm going to list Omega Sentinel again later on, but obviously Omega Sentinel has access to armor ups and she's nullify immune. Then we have Nimrod, where armor breaks do not remove armor, so again it kind of discounts one of these methods, and then you're left with ability accuracy reduction, or bypassing the damage you take from it, which isn't going to work too well, I think, because most of the champions that can do that are the mutants. And then on top of it you still have the nullify, but again Nimrod does kind of hinder Mystic champions to a degree by inflicting the cowardice and the power drain debuffs on them. Warlock again is going to be somewhat more potent defender as previously, Howard the Duck. And then these are a lot of champions that could potentially be problems. I can see Civil Warrior being a problem as immune to nullify and constant access to armor buffs, but still there is the armor break, there is the ability accuracy reduction, and so on and so forth. So ultimately I do think some of these champions will shine and show up somewhere. I do expect to see majority of them in one deck or another, but again some of them I don't think are going to be that big of a deal. Now we are gonna get into a bigger problem situations, and that's going to be number one, the armor break immunity, because especially in these conditions, majority of these champions or almost all of these champions are mystics, and again mystics are going to be quite hard to tackle with a very limited amount of science attackers being capable to enter these fights. And then we have Wiccan, who's not only armor break immune, obviously he's one of those champions you can't parry, really. He, is going to be one of those hit or miss defenders because he is quite squishy. But we have Sasquatch, Man-Thing, Dr. Doom, Mangog, all of whom are armor break immune, and all of whom are very good defenders as is. And I do think in the upcoming meta they are going to be significantly harder defenders to deal with, because there are going to be less suitable counters, as in a lot of champions you would normally want to use against these guys, be that Spider-Ham or be that Scorpion, be that something else. You will not have the ability to do so freely by the looks of it. So I definitely do think that these guys can pose quite a bit of danger. And then we have obvious the nullify immunities, again just covering those mystics largely. So we're going to have Galen. Thing I think is going to be an absolute menace with armor break immunity and nullify immunity, leaving you with only two options: either to be able to nullify the damage that you take, so use something like Namor or Kitty Pryde arguably, or use Falcon or something that has very potent ability accuracy reduction mechanics, which would incidentally help you against Thing anyways to bypass the protection. So I do think that Thing's going to be one of those champions you definitely need to be on the lookout for. But again, it could be still Civil Warrior, Omega Sentinel, as well as Galen. But the bigger problem, I think, that is kind of making me slightly worried about this entire situation about the upcoming meta are the champions that are going to be and are always nasty defenders. For instance, we have Domino, right? I don't think you will be able to use Omega Sentinel effectively against Domino, for instance, because Omega Sentinel needs to get to that level 2 to finish off that fight, and she has no way in dealing with armor up. So, for instance, one of the like 3 or 4 Domino counters, but basically gets immediately, discounted, where, you might be able to squeak by, but it's probably going to be less than ideal. Then we have also like additional Domino counter, which is Guardian, and Guardian again doesn't have any way to deal with that direct damage or prevent armor ups from happening. So I just, that's another counter which I don't necessarily see working extremely well against Domino. And that leaves us with Nimrod, who I think could potentially work because he does have a single hit heavy attack. And he likely will be able to get up to his level 2 to be able to nuke down Domino with a single level 2, especially because parry heavy playstyle will involve you getting lots of armor ups, and that means your level 2 is going to do more damage. So I do think you're going to be able to parry heavy your way up to level 2 with Nimrod, because it's single hit heavy attack, and finish off the fight there. Then I do think Howard the Duck is going to be one of the most important Domino counters in the upcoming meta. But other than that, there's going to be Archangel. Of course, there's going to be Archangel, but that fight's always kind of RNG reliant. And besides that, you're going to be basically forced to rely on your nullifies, your armor breaks, your, rest of the kit, which doesn't work that well against Domino in most cases. So I do think that there will be quite limited amount of great Domino counters, which is going to make her, an extreme pain in the butt. Then I think another thing that's going to be obviously, quite troublesome, still going to be Rintrah. Because again, Rintrah doesn't get affected much by armor breaks. He, is a very limited champion in the terms of great counters. And again, some of the best counters against Rintrah are going to be unavailable in this meta. And that means that there's going to be only like a handful of champions that you can potentially use to take down Rintrah at, efficient manner. Because again, typically you'd use your Scorpion. Doesn't quite work out that well. Spider-Ham doesn't work out that well. And, a lot of these champions that could deal with Rintrah are going to be lagging. So I think Rintrah is going to be quite lethal. And as well, obviously, he has offensive potential. Then obviously we have Dragonman, who is going to be one of those guys who completely deters any armor breaks, because he's going to put a massive degen on you whilst his armor broken. So again, you have the nullify, you have the ability accuracy stuff, but Dragonman, with his long special attacks, with his, MD and extra power gain and all that other stuff, again, limits kind of champions that you will be able to bring in the fight against him, and completely eliminating all of the armor break champions and then leaving you with, a handful of other solutions could be quite problematic. I think another big problem is going to be the champions that require additional immunity or pose in additional kind of sets of combinations. For instance, if we place Immortal Abomination, you automatically, obviously you need a poison immune character or like something like Kingpin, but then you also need somebody that can deal with Immortal Abomination's power burn and power drain in this meta. And there aren't going to be that many of them because, Hulkling obviously is going to be banned most of the time. Rest of these, they're not really poison immune. And then, we have Medusa. But again, the rest of these, they're not really poison immune. Most of the Mystics, again, do not really have a way to deal with the poison. And most of the champions here don't really have a way to deal with the poison. So, from the top of my head, there are going to be very limited amount of counters to Immortal Abomination when you need to deal with power burn, power drain, and the poison that's coming from it. And, with a similar solution there, we have Toad, for instance, Toad also, pretty much requires you to be poison immune or have some ability to deal with that, or kind of very specific playstyle. So I do think he's going to be more problematic on defense. Now, a problem with these champions is that, with the exception of Mephisto, in this short list of 4 champions, all of them are going to be quite useless, I would say, offensively. So it is going to be kind of like, again, one of those things which I really don't like doing, is where you fracture your deck into set attackers, set defenders, which makes you less versatile to deal with different situations. But again, we have Mephisto, for instance, where you need a champion that's able to deal with Mephisto, well enough. So you need either that Incinerate immunity, but even with just Incinerate immunity, Mephisto isn't necessarily the easiest champion to take down. And then when you need to take in consideration his 15-second, buff prevention on your side initially, when you need to take in consideration Mystic Dispersion, all the power gain that he's going to be getting, and the fact that there's going to be very, very, very limited amount of science champions that will function well in this meta, it is just going to make countering Mephisto harder, because typically at the moment, how do we counter Mephisto? It's Human Torch. Okay, fine, Human Torch might be still used, but, likely going to get banned quite often. Then we have Scorpion, whose Scorpion's going to be nowhere to be seen likely. We're going to have Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham's going to be nowhere to be seen likely, so on and so forth. So again, these champions who have very limited amount of counters in this meta are likely going to be way, way bigger problems. And Mephisto, actually, if you count him at rank 4, can be decent offensively as well for the next meta, because you just prevent opponent from gaining buffs, and if they didn't start with an armor buff as is, you can basically prevent them from getting an armor buff ever throughout the fight, and finish the fight that way. Another interesting champion that I definitely want to kind of test out, try out, I'm kind of considering maybe I'm going to give him a gem and some 6 stones, is Iceman in this situation, because again, against Iceman, if your Iceman's quite high sig, I do think his ice armor will count as an armor buff, and with that, you would need somebody that's basically able to deal with armor ups from the get-go and is also Cold Snap immune. And Cold Snap immunity is not necessarily the most common or easy immunity to deal with, and there might not be that many great counters to Iceman in this upcoming meta that will also be able to, get rid of that Cold Snap or deal with the Cold Snap damage. So it's another one of those champions which I think could be potential sleeper MVPs defensively. Obviously, again, offensively, he wouldn't have much use because he has no way of dealing with the armor ups, but defensively, again, there is just not that many options that will work great against him. So these are more or less the champions that I think we will see dominating. Obviously, there will be other good defenders like there always have been, and many of the standard staples will work, and I actually encourage you to list up some more champions that you think will be quite formidable on defense. As I said, I don't think the champions that start with the armor up buff are gonna be necessarily automatic wins. I think starting with the armor up buff and not having any extra immunity, stuff like that, is gonna be relatively easy to bypass. Because, for instance, we're still going to have the Clairvoyant Sigil Witch that can nullify. We're going to have potentially Symbiote Supreme in our decks that will nullify all the armor buffs at the beginning. I do think then obviously we have the Medusas, the Vision Arcus, Silver Surfers, OG Tors that will be able to get rid of these starting armor ups extremely easily. So I don't think just having an armor up to start the fight is going to be that big of a problem. It is obviously going to be helpful against Rintra, Tigra, and Wiccan, and Dr. Doom, and a handful of other mystics, but in general, again, it's not necessarily something I'm most afraid of. I'm most afraid of is the champions that don't have an armor buff, but are hard to deal with and have limited counters as is. Because again, when you take a champion like Rintra, and you get rid of, I don't know, half of potential attackers that you would normally use against Rintra, you're left with a defensive problem. Same with Domino. When you take Domino, consider how few champions can take down Domino effectively, like really effectively. Then, take away half of them. What are you going to left with? Like 2 or 3 champions that are going to work well against Domino. Well, at the first glance anyways. So I do think she can potentially be extremely dangerous, and same goes for Thing. Again, just get rid of majority of the champions that Thing can be taken down by super efficiently, and what are you left with? A defensive problem. So I think that is going to be the main aspect to focus on. I don't think starting with an armor of like with Howard the Duck or Guardian or Warlock, for instance, is going to be the biggest problem. Obviously, these champions are going to be bigger problems defensively than they normally would be. For instance, Warlock, right? There will be less champions that you can use against Warlock, but also we will fill our decks with champions that, baseline all should have the ability to get rid of an armor buff. The problem is going to be with champions that typically already require specific options. And now the potential counters to them are just going to be whittled down even further. And that's the scariest thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. Again, obviously there will be more champions than listed here that can be potential defensive problems. And some of these champions might not be a problem at all. So it's going to be very, very exciting season. I do think this season quite heavily emphasizes your roster size and your ability to rank up champions for this season. Otherwise, I think a lot of people will struggle because a lot of your staple champions will not necessarily work exceptionally well. So let me know what you guys think, and yeah, leave a comment if you have some great ideas. I'm always willing to read through them. See you next time.
Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the